I've just come off a drama upload called Hitler the Rise of Evil from a few years back. It's a Canadian production starring Robert Carlyle in the lead role. Um, but it's not so much about the film itself I want to talk. There's just been various adaptations of portrayals of Hitler, some better than others. I thought this one was quite good, but anyway, that's not the point. Um, what got my attention was some comments coming from Arabs on that forum, um, which were fiercely anti-Jewish. I won't say anti-Semitic because it's technically not quite accurate. Semites are basically any group of people from the Middle East. That doesn't just refer to Jews. So when we talk about anti-Semitic, it's slightly misleading. When we talk about anti-Jewish bigotry and so on. So I'll say anti-Jewish sentiments. Anti-Semitic, people know what that means anyway. But yeah, there was one such comment, and the person was basically coming out with such things like, this is part of the Jews' plan. In fact, just bear with me a second, I'll quote this directly, show you what I'm talking about. Um, okay, this is from Kara Yolda. Hitler knew of the Illuminati part, and that's why he killed Jews, because the Jews are just bad. They look quiet and good, but they got evil inside them. Why is there always war going on in Palestine? Muslim people, women and children being killed. It's Jews' plan. And they got the money and power so they just do it and no one can stop them. Hitler tried and failed because it is all set up and they will not fail. I got quite angry with this statement and I confronted this person. Told him exactly what I thought of that. But I'd also like to speak in general about my views on anti-Jewish sentiments. First of all, if you're criticising Judaism as a religion, certain aspects of Judaism, I think that's legitimate. In the same way, I think it's legitimate to criticise Islam, Christianity, Hinduism. I believe religions are not above criticism. So if you want to criticise aspects of Judaism, that's fine. But we aren't seeing that. We are seeing outright anti-Semitism here, and that's just one example. Jewish feelings are rampant throughout. Now, quite often when you hear people interviewed, they'll claim they're just against Israel, they're not against Jews. But beneath the surface, if you probe a bit further, you will see that actually there are deep anti-Jewish sentiments there. There's another point I'd like to make. I am not one of these people who say that all criticism of Israel is the same as criticising Jewish people. I mean, for one thing, there's many Jews who are highly critical of Israel, the state, Israeli policy and so on, and they would also not identify themselves as Zionists. What you have to understand is within Judaism, like any of the Abrahamic religions, there's different branches. You have liberal Jews, Orthodox Jews, Zionist Jews, etc. But before I continue, by the way, I'm not Jewish, just in case anyone believes that. Jews have been persecuted throughout history, mercilessly. And I'm not just talking about the Shoah during World War II. There was anti-Jewish hostility, pogroms long before that. In Russia, there was many, and Eastern Europe, there's many anti-Jewish pogroms during the Romanov years and well into the 20th century, which is why there was large influxes of Jewish refugees into London and Paris and other Western European cities. And going right back to the Middle Ages, there's a long, long history in Europe of anti-Jewish bigotry, anti-Jewish superstition. Here in England, we were comparatively moderate by the standards of other European countries. But as far back as 1189, when Richard I ascended the throne, there was anti-Jewish riots in London. Hundreds were killed. There was many throughout medieval London. And in other parts of Europe, there's even worse pogroms. Going back to Britain, in York, there's a place called Clifford's Tower, where something like, I think it was 190 men, women and children were trapped inside that tower and burned alive. Wherever the Jews have been, they have faced persecution. Now, there's no way in a 15-minute video I could go into the very complex issues about the State of Israel, foundation, land disputes, territorial disputes, all that sort of thing. It's simply too complicated for a 15-minute video. I don't even know everything, so I'm not going to get into that. I'm talking more here about just general anti-Jewish bigotry. I am not talking about criticism of Israel, although I think a lot of that is invalid. I think there's a real hypocrisy at the moment from a lot of Muslims who are focusing enormously on the Palestinian issue, yet seem to be ignoring other cases whereby Muslims are suffering, such as the Rohingya people in Burma. They're Muslims, they're suffering enormously. There's some sources suggest as many as 10,000 people have been killed this year. Now that source can't be confirmed, but it's obvious a lot more Rohingya have died this year than Palestinians. So why the focus on Palestinians? I believe the real issue, in many cases, is not anti-Israel, which is legitimate enough. No nation is above criticism. But it's actually an endorsement of some of the very dangerous conspiracy theories out there. Such as, and the danger with these conspiracy theories is they know no limit. You know, it starts off with Jews are greedy, Jews are controlling the world banking system, Jews staged 9/11, Jews done this, Jews done that. These are very dangerous. First of all, let's look at some of the stereotypes. Well, it is true, a number of bankers are Jewish, they are successful. Okay, now I've had a few things to say about bankers, but I'm talking about bankers in general. And when we think about business tycoons, it's wrong to say they're all Jewish. I mean, Lakshmi Mittal, the Indian magnate, he's been accused of exploiting child labour in India. He's not Jewish. And there's many other examples. Jews tend to be good business people, that's true. But what I would say is, by all means criticise the banking sector, but when you focus on Jews, that becomes very dangerous. You know, saying all Jews are bankers who are trying to control the world economic system is just as dangerous and bigoted as saying all Muslims are terrorists. It's simply wrong. And by the way, throughout history, the idea that all Jews have been privileged, wealthy people is just rubbish. Because when those pogroms occurred, some of the Jews living in East London were living in absolute poverty. And on top of that, they faced the discrimination. You know, during the famous Jack the Ripper murders in London, that's a case I'm very interested in. I'll probably make other videos about that. But the level of anti-Jewish tension was at boiling point. There was a lot of conspiracies that it may have been a Jew who was Jack the Ripper. But the sort of anti-Semitism I'm seeing, I mean, obviously this person, Yara Kolda, I'm not sure where they're from, I'm not sure if they're Palestinian or Arab or what, Kara Yolda, but whoever they are, they're clearly brainwashed by Arab media. Because Arab media, you can guarantee, will only show one side in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm sick and tired of the vilification of Israel. Now, I have always said Israel is not above criticism. And there are times I've criticised Israel. And I will continue to criticise Israel if I believe they are wrong. But what we are seeing here is there's no balance. There's this sort of thing whereby people see the suffering in the Gaza Strip, which is undoubtedly awful, but they imply that it's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's not comparable to what's going on in South Sudan or the Rohingya people. And there's a real hypocrisy here. Why so much focus on Gaza and the Palestinians compared to other humanitarian crises? And I do think that's suspicious, that Muslims tend to be so obsessed by Gaza and seem to ignore the human rights abuses going on in Iran, the mass murder going on in Syria, the ethnic cleansing going on in Burma, all those situations are arguably a lot worse than what's happening in Gaza, and I'm not trivializing what's happening in Gaza. It's a bad situation. But let's put this in context. The death toll from this latest Israel-Gaza flare-up has been about 140. That's a lot, that's serious. They're each human lives. But let's put this in context. 39,000 plus Syrians have been killed, not by Israel, but by the Assad regime and by the sectarian violence that has gripped Syria. That wasn't a result of Israel. So why are Muslims not focusing on the situation in Syria? I think that's a legitimate question. Why not? Why ignore that? And there seems to be this spiteful, vicious, anti-Jewish sentiments are arising out of this conflict. Now, if people are criticising Israel, okay, I don't entirely agree with all that criticism, but I do believe that's more valid than making it a Jewish thing. And I don't believe either Israel or Zionism are above criticism. I'm not a huge fan of neo-Zionism, and there's plenty of examples of Jewish extremists, Zionist fanatics. I forget the guy's name, but in the 90s there was a Zionist fanatic who killed 30 Muslims in a mosque in Israel, who, by the way, he was tried in an Israeli court. So the idea that Israel's a racist society, I don't buy that. It's by far a lot more progressive than the societies around it. Let's not forget, many Israeli citizens are Arabs and Muslims. So the idea that all Israelis are Jews is just rubbish. I just find it disturbing, the sheer level of anti-Semitism that is around. And in conclusion, I'm not saying Judaism, the religion, is above criticism. I'm not saying Israel or Zionism are above criticism. But what I'm saying is that some of that vicious anti-Semitism that we're seeing has no justification. And when you get to the point of people actually condoning what Hitler done, one of the worst crimes in human history, if not the worst, it's sickening. It's really quite sickening. The Shoah happened. Just deal with it. It happened, and it was one of the worst crimes in human history. And people are saying what Israel's doing today is they're taking out what happened in the Holocaust on the Palestinians. That's not true. What Israel is doing is defending itself from Hamas terrorism. It's nothing to do with the Holocaust. So that's just our propaganda, basically. And you see this anti-Semitism everywhere. I've seen it within the anti-war coalition, Stop the War coalition, I should say. People who are convinced, this ignorant generalization of Jews. There are many Jews who are very left-wing and very critical of American and British and Israeli policies. So let's just stop with the generalizations. I'll leave it there, but this video is just to express my disgust at the sort of anti-Jewish sentiments that are around, that are baseless, sort of accusations that are utterly baseless, and it's disturbing, quite frankly. By all means, criticize greedy bankers, but don't focus on Jews. It's just because, not every Jew is a rich banker. That's just... And it's this sort of paranoia and suspicion that led to the Holocaust in the first place. It's disturbing. Okay, so I'll leave it there.